Session Blood.
Hello everybody and welcome to Session Blood episode 40. My name's Kieran and I'm here with my co-host extraordinaire as always, Carol.
Hello everybody.
And today I'm actually pumped. I'm super hyped for today's episode because we have none other than the calling champion, Tyler Horspool. And without further ado, I'd just like to introduce Tyler and give an opportunity to say hello. And if you have any shout-outs, Tyler, feel free to go ahead because we love shout-outs on this show.
Oh, hey guys. Super excited to be here. And sure, I'd like to shout out my team at Top Deck Keep. It's in Riverside, California, Southern California area. And then two people in particular who helped me out with testing for the calling. Although I could go down the list, but the two people in particular are Chris Ayali and Adam Fiffles.
All right.
Awesome.
Showing love to the teammates. I love that. That's the thing with shout-outs sometimes, right? Like, I always get in trouble because I go through a couple and then inevitably leave someone off and I'm like, oh, sorry.
Oh man, I'm leaving like maybe 8 to 10 people off, and I'm gonna hear it later. But in the interest of time, we'll get to them later.
Yeah, sweet as. Maybe we'll put them in the description, in the video.
There we go.
So, yeah, I mean, basically, before we sort of get into a bit of the calling breakdown itself, we just wanted to get maybe a little bit of background, sort of, how you got into Flesh and Blood, and if you have a bit of a history in trading card games, or is Fab your first one?
It is not. I've been playing Magic the Gathering for about 10 years. I even played a little Pokemon for a while, and I found some modest success, but I've never had this level of success. Although what I would be aptly probably describe myself as is grinder. Going to tournaments every weekend, often testing. That's always been part of the game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's one thing about Flesh and Blood. There are quite a number of sort of former Magic players or players who played other card games at Advance who have kind of moved over. Carol and myself are both in that category. The game that must not be named. But
yeah, that's what we don't talk about it anymore because now it's all Flesh and Blood, right?
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
it's interesting. I feel one thing with Magic players, sometimes it's like, I know I hadn't played in a long time before. I hadn't played sort of any competitive TCG for quite a while before jumping into Fab, like I had previously. And I was a bit resistant. I always tell the story. I walked in and saw some people playing with heroes and equipment, and I was like, I'm never trying this. And then played one game of Sealed, and then 3 days later, spent like $400 on legendaries and a full deck. So committed very quickly. But anyway, enough about myself because I get distracted easily. I was just going to jump right into things and basically ask how you ended up settling on Prism as a deck, because I know you. I loved a bit of the cheeky call out and the winning interview right after you won, saying that, giving a shout out to Arsenal Pass, who always saying Prism is bad, and then winning the tournament on Prism. I love that.
Oh, that was great.
We love the Arsenal Pass boys. Shout out Hayden and Brendan, but that was a great piece of interviewing. I loved it. But
I'm a big fan. But you got to call them out every once in a while.
Absolutely, it just has to be done. But I just wondered, is Prism, is that like a deck you played throughout the Road to Nationals season, or was like a last minute switch kind of thing? What was the thought behind taking this to the calling?
Yeah, so I actually I've only been playing Flesh and Blood for about 2 months now. This is, or a month and a half really. And
very impressive.
Katsu was the first deck that I picked up, and I like the combo chains. I've always been kind of a combo player, no pun intended. But then I got a hold of Prism, and a lot of the matchups are great. You have I felt like Bravo was great. Dorinthia is almost a buy sometimes, but the Chane matchup just always seemed elusive for the longest time. I ended up taking it to my first Road to Nationals, and I ended up winning, which was mostly off the back of dodging Chane. Like, I only played 2 chains the whole day, and I went 1-1 off the Herald aggro plan. So I was playing kind of a red Prism, and then, well, still with the auras, but I was playing the red package to bring in. and then I got off it for my next road to nationals. I played Katsu. I tried to do the Matt Rogers thing where I played two different decks trying to win both, and turns out I'm no Matt Rogers. But then I got back on the Prism train because I won the road to nationals with it, and I was like, how can we fix this Chane matchup? And a friend of mine said, well, there's just two ways to beat Chane. You can either aggro them out, or you can block everything they got. And so I tried both of those, and this is when I started finding success in the matchup. And since then, I just brought it to the calling, and the rest is history.
I've just got
I just want to say that I won't be surprised if people start calling you Dr. Horspool, because you put on a clinic that was amazing. From someone who was just watching from home at the stream, it just seems like people are just coming into all these chains coming into your office, and you're just giving a healthy dose of vitamin ALS. That was so beautiful. I have so much respect for you just because of how much you kept the composure. There were times, I remember even watching that you were well ahead, and there was nothing your opponent could do, and you would still just, casually drop the Genesis when your opponent has like 0 cards left in the deck. It was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I will say that, so I went 7-1 versus Chains during the weekend, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, but even the one match I lost was purely off getting baited into attacking because he was so low life, and that ended up being my downfall, was not being patient. So in the later rounds, you just saw me pure block all the time. This is how I win, and it paid off.
Yeah, that's well, one thing I just got to ask very briefly before we move on is, I know you experimented a little bit with playing some Katsu. Were you a aggro Katsu or control Katsu player / mid-range?
I did both. I would consider myself more of the control player. I'm always going to gravitate towards control decks if I can help it. But the aggro Katsu plan was a little bit more successful for me than the control Katsu plan.
Love to hear it. I'm a bit of an aggro Katsu fan myself, so I'm just seeking a little validation there. There you have it, calling champion Tyler. Aggro Katsu's better. Yes.
Fair enough.
Before, and as you mentioned, we're actually very keen to sort of dive right in and talk about that Chane matchup in particular, because, we feel that was the matchup on everyone's mind, sort of, how do you beat this just seemingly unstoppable deck that builds up giant card advantage from all these number of hands and everything. But maybe just before we go into that, just wanted to ask about how your tournament experience kind of generally was, so that, how was it turning up to the venue? Did you play the world premiere? Was it kind of a good atmosphere, fun time, that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, obviously. It's hard for me to get in there on Fridays because I'm a teacher, and it's hard to get away from the kids. I got to teach math and all that. So I did not get to go to the premiere, but I came in Friday night, got a good night's sleep, came up Saturday morning. The tournament was greatly run, considering that, you got to consider that most of these judges are judging this event for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, it was a well-run event. Every single one of my opponents was wonderful. These are the kind of people that you love to play card games with. I have no complaints. As far as my own play and judge calls that came into it, it got a little bit dicey at times. And if you want to hear about those, we could talk about those as well. But overall, this was awesome. I had so much fun, and even if I had lost, I gotta say it was just so much fun to be playing cards again.
Oh, awesome! And I love that thing about being a math teacher. I can see going into class next week. All right, kids. So Chane banishes 1 card per soul shackle. Generates 1 per turn. How many turns do they run off the cards?
We'll get them eventually. We start them on chess, and then we give them a healthy dose of flesh and blood.
Nice.
Yeah, sorry, Carol, I cut you off there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to any listeners who are thinking of going to tournaments, in terms of judge calls, you always have the ability to ask the head judge for a second opinion. So it's something to be it's something to keep in mind. If you're not sure about a judge call, you can always ask to ask the head judge for a second opinion.
Yep, that's a very good point, and because as Tyler pointed out, like absolutely no disrespect intended towards the judges, but a lot of judges, it is maybe their first major event or one of their first events judging full stop, and I think the important thing is just having the right attitude and do it respectfully. So if the judge gives you a ruling and you feel that it might not quite be correct, you can always say, do you mind if I just appeal that to the head judge just so we can 100% clarify? And, everyone's going to be okay with that. Tournament life on the line, double check with the judge. Doesn't hurt.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, tournament experience, pretty good in general. So, I guess, let's just jump right into it. So, the Chane matchup. So, you spoke before about having a couple of different strategies that you were trying against Chane. One was sort of just full aggro race. I'm assuming that involves just playing a couple of heralds each turn and seeing if you can kind of beat them down with these powerful on-hits, things like Herald of Erudition, Herald of Judgment, and then the more sort of block everything they do strategy. Can you maybe sort of go into a bit more detail of how this blocking strategy, like how you tested it and how it worked for you?
Yeah, so I was right off going for the defense reactions because this wasn't a list that I saw. The list that I saw before were either you're playing full on auras or you're playing the red heralds, or you're playing a meld between the two. There was no aura and then defensive package that you bring in. And so I just packed all the defensive reactions I could into my sideboard, and then including the sigils. The sigils were grade A, and then swapped those out. And then the main thing that I actually unlocked everything for me was that tunic. I would swap the tunic out for the vestige when I wanted to play defensive. And what this did was the sigils get you ahead early. You have access to basically 6 types of snag, arclight type things where you can stop your opponent's turn. And that's just not present in any other deck. And so you didn't really see it in my top 8 matches, actually. Actually, there was the time snap where I double arclighted, but...
that was we'll get back to that. We'll come back to that one because that was a highlight play. But
yeah. But for the most part, in my finals match, I actually never drew a snag or arclight in the later turns to stop my opponent, which you still saw me block out and barely eke out that win. So even without the big turns, you're still able to win. And so that's just generally how my matchups would go over and over again. Is I was just winning off either them blood deading themselves or they couldn't kill me.
Interesting, yeah, because you mentioned the aura plan, because I'm just having a look at your deck list here, and I can see you've got basically 3 of all the major auras, so that the Parable, Humility, Merciful Retribution, Ode to Wraith, Genesis, I suppose Arclight if we count that as well. Just had a question about your general sideboarding strategy against Chane. What sort of cards are you taking out against them, and are you looking to play like a clean 60 card list, or are you running a few more than that?
So I have cards in my so-called main deck that are just good against Chane, but I think this is something that isn't talked about in a lot of strategy articles, but that I gravitate towards too, is that you can just have blues in your deck, or like things that you pitch for mana that aren't good in most matchups, but you're using for just the Chane matchup, because you're just going to pitch those in most matchups, but then all of a sudden you bring in all these cards versus Chane, and these are just extra cards that are naturally in your main deck. So I was always running, I forget the name, the blue card that blocks for 4 on
The
Vanish.
Impenetrable Belief, yeah, I really liked that, by the way, that was great.
So you would see me running, like, even against the Dash player, you can see me pitching that card, even though it's not good in that matchup. It's because it's just naturally in my main deck. And so this allows me to have more cards versus the matchup that I consider the hard one. And then, and so that the sideboarding strategy is take out 6 of my auras, which are the Merciful Retributions and the Ode to Wraths. I keep in Parable, Arclight, Sentinel, and Genesis. And then I also take out the Prismatic Shields, which are bad. And I take out... the last card's now eluding me now that I'm not playing the tournament anymore, but that's the general sideboard strategy.
Do you keep all the Tome of Divinities in there?
Oh, the tomes come out. The tomes come out. You're right.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
So
once Vestige comes out, they're no longer gonna give you those awesome turns.
right, I see. So a lot of it sounds like you're taking out basically up to 12, I think, 0 block cards because they just don't. Is that they don't really gel in with your blocking strategy? I'm assuming. So a lot of those just come out for this quite, you know, difficult matchup. Well, matchup where every point of life matters. So you just don't want to be stuck with these cards that don't defend. Is that kind of the general idea?
Yes, that's the general idea. You're taking out cards that you don't want to play and you can't block with. And you're bringing in all these defense reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Parable in Genesis, because those cards don't defend, but you still like to keep them in. So what's the kind of thinking behind that?
Well, you only have so many cards that you can take out in the matchup, and then Parable's actually not that bad. I've played it a number of times during the weekend against Chane, and they either have to break it with Spectra, which is taking up an attack and ending their turn, or and granted they can go again, hit the Parable, but each of those attacks that they did before, it's -1, so it's almost blocking for more than 3 by just playing it. And so if they have an off turn, you just land that Parable, or even land a Genesis and make a Spectral Shield. And again, that's a Spectral Shield that's taking a damage or soaking up a Rune Chant or whatever, and then the Genesis itself is gonna eat an attack as well. Now these are cards that you generally don't want to play in the later turns because you want to be blocking, but you can always pitch those to Footsteps to block, and Footsteps gets great value. And so you can have some number of cards in your deck, and these are just the ones that I've deemed better than the other cards that I take out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think I saw you do that a number of times across the top 8. You know, a lot of these cards are yellow cards. You know, the auras and things like that. So, and Chane is quite good at splitting damage between arcane and physical as well. So just having that option, which I saw you do, you know, pitching this yellow card that doesn't defend to stop 1 arcane damage and turn on the Phantasmal Footsteps. It's like, you know, now my 0 block card actually effectively defends for 2, which isn't the worst thing.
Yeah, not at all. Phantasmal Footsteps is a fantastic blocking piece, not only in the Chane matchup, but also the dash on the top 8. Blocking that pistol over and over again is something.
Yeah,
that's so true.
That's a really good point because every time they put a counter on that gun, it resets the combat chain. So you're just getting that sort of, you know, how many times do you want to shoot me because I'm blocking for 1 over and over.
Absolutely.
The one thing I just wanted to talk about a bit more detail is, which I really, really liked in your build, is the Fyndale Spring Tunic against Chane. Just to elaborate a little bit on our listeners, do you want to explain the power of that in the matchup? Because in my mind, I just saw it come up so often where you let that Tunic tick up to 3, and then sort of bam, it's preventing an arcane damage or it's turning on Phantasmal Footsteps, which just seems so powerful to me. Was that kind of the primary reason to do that for the value, or was there some other thoughts behind that one?
The biggest reason that you want Tunic over Vestige is because Vestige isn't very good when you're using it on their turn, and you can't banish, and you actually don't want to put that many things in the soul because they have things like Soul Reaping and Ursur Token that get natural go again if you have a card in your banish. So you'll actually see me avoid playing Soul Shield a lot because I don't want that card in my soul. And so when you're actively trying not to do that, you're not turning on Vestige. Vestige gets you no value. Tunic is the perfect mana because it's getting you that mana every turn. You can use it for Footsteps. You can use it to play the Soul Shield if you really do want to play it, and then you can also use it to prevent arcane damage. So you're doing it on their turn, which means on your turn the Tunic's going to keep ticking up no matter what.
Yeah, that's a great point, and also it's just great to. I mean, we talk about generally breakpoints in order for like defending and attacking, but also you could talk about breakpoints for resources, things like Genesis, Parable. These things that cost 4 resources, they're suddenly 1 pitch to play it with the Tunic on 3 counters if you need to do it in that sense, which again is very cool. And I think that's great, you know, just looking ahead and saying like what's a small amount of incremental value I can get by including an additional equipment, not just saying I'm going to play the same equipment every single matchup no matter what. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, I thought that was literally the piece that unlocked it all. I think that without that, that's an extra probably, I don't know, 5 to 6 damage a game, and that might be backbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking to kind of summarize the Chane matchup because you saw so much success in the matchup. Could you kind of elaborate about the one game that Chane managed to take away in the tournament?
Yeah, this was the very last round of the Swiss. I was X1 and I was playing against the number 1 seed, Joe Cologne, and what happened? He baited me kind of into attacking him by going down to 14. He wasn't playing Husk. He was playing Tunic instead. And I had a handful of Herald of Judgment, and I thought, this is my chance. I'm just going to go for the win here rather than block it out. And so I took a big Riftbind turn that put me down from 38 down to, I want to say, 21, somewhere in that range. And then I'm like, here we go, I'm about to attack. And he blocked out my Herald of Judgment, took very little damage off of the other Herald, and then still had a good turn, which, as Chane often does, he can do stuff off of 1 blue. And then that completely turned the matchup on its head. And then I went back to blocking, but by then it was a little bit too late. It turns out at the end I could have still won the match. So I'll paint the game state for you. He has 5 cards in Banish. He's at 5 life. He's attacking me with an Exude Confidence, which I'm blocking with a 6 Power Herald. He buffs it up to 6, and I'm blocking for 4 with the Footsteps. And I have the ability to Soul Shield it. But he has an Invert Existence in his Banish zone with 2 resources floating. And I think I'm just dead, right? I'm at 1 life. As it turns out, my deck list does not play any non-attack actions. So if I had just known that, I would have won the game.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's funny, those things sometimes that they just don't pop up that often. You forget about it. I think in a pre-release actually for Monarch one time, I lost a game because I had Invert Existence, but I kind of didn't read it and thought you had to target a non-attack and an attack. So I was playing against the Prism. I banished it turn 1 and it sat there for 10 turns. And then after the game, my opponent goes,
"Oh no!"
My opponent said, "Oh, that was quite greedy. Like, why didn't you just play it?" I'm like, "Wait, what?"
Waiting for the non-attack. Yeah. I just took the 2 damage off the Exude, thinking I was dead to the invert anyway, and so it should have been 8-0 versus Chane, but I'm still
big shout out to Joe Cologne for managing to take a win off you.
Yeah, and he played to his credit, he played it great. So props to him.
One thing I wanted to talk about further, I know we're focusing pretty heavily on Chane. We'll look to speak out a couple other heroes as well. It's just that Chane seemed to be so much of the metagame and so much of day 2 that we're focusing quite heavily on it. For Chane, I know that you've mentioned at length your strategy has been largely to defend out and fatigue against its deck. Are there certain builds of Chane that you feel are more difficult to do that than others? What I'm referring to here is, I know that some builds run things like Flock of the Featherwalker to set up these really big turns, and also things like Seeping Shadows, either blue or yellow or both, to really look to try and grind out that late game. Maybe they run 70 plus cards. Was it your experience over the weekend that there were like certain builds were harder than others, or did your game plan, you feel, work pretty well against pretty much everything you ran into?
So there were decks that were more successful, and I found those later in the tournament that I was getting to lower life totals. And so Exude Confidence was a big one that I had trouble with. As I said, Joe Cologne beat, he played multiple Exude Confidences on me, and that turns off your instance if it's played right. And I have Arclight Sentinels and stuff I'd like to play, or defense reactions I'd like to play, and I can't do that anymore. The other one that I had trouble in the finals was the Razor Reflex build. And that's because you can much easier kill my Phantasmal Footsteps early, and then I'm going to have trouble. So I had to be very careful blocking in that particular matchup. But I think the deck is able to handle all of that. Chane is such a good deck, and it's easy to innovate that I'm sure there's a way to innovate it to beat my build. But so far it's been taking all of the blows.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things that if you see your opponent running things like Husk and the Arcanite Skullcap and Grasp, you can already kind of decide, okay, I'm going to tank this one out. But would you approach the game differently if you see someone like an Ebenfold and like, let's say, either Ironweave and kind of more of an aggressive equipment setup?
Not with the build that I have, because that's mostly because I'm not running the big heralds to like swing the race in my favor, so I can't just like suddenly go to attack. That being said, for someone that plays a lot of non-attack actions, and I think this is where I'm gonna unlock hopefully a lot of Prism players with this deck, is that most people I saw were playing Arclight Sentinel to just stop a turn. They would play it on their turn or the beginning after they saw a bunch of Soul Shackles to put a bunch of Blood Debt, and that is not how you should be approaching the card. The card should be wait for them to play Seeds, Soul Shackle, and then you should be treating that as I'm going to eat their non-attack actions, because that's going to be damage off the table. That's a smaller Rift Bind. That's a less seeds that they get to play later in the game. Less,
So is the Soul Shackle activation, is that kind of when you're like, okay, now this is where I drop it?
It depends, because any go again card is going to be obviously a big thing for me, because Chane players often have to play the go again before they play their card. So even if you see a Plunder Run, which is a big card that I want to take off the table, I might choose to be more greedy. Now, Enlightened Strike makes that a little bit difficult, because that card just gets natural go again, and I don't want to take attacks on Arclight turns, so you kind of have to feel the turnout, and a lot of this is just playing Chane over and over again, so you know how the deck plays out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things I just wanted to ask as well, when you're sort of looking to run these chains out of cards, are there certain key cards that you're keeping track of, either that they've played or in their banish zone while playing this? Like, for example, when I was watching some of these games that you were playing in the top 8, I saw you playing against these chains. I was sort of counting down in my head. I'm like, okay, the Chane player, that's all 3 Art of War's gone. Okay, now that's 2 Shadow Puppetry's gone. That's 2 Mover and Sky's gone. In my mind, a lot of the critical cards seem to be these cards that could generate go again, like you're talking about. So that allows you to play sort of more than just your 2 actions per turn. So rather than just being able to go Soul Shackle, 1 attack, 2nd attack, being able to go, Shadow Puppetry or Art of War with go again, or Mover and Skies and run out 3 or 4 attacks, things like that. Were there critical cards like these that you looked out for, or was it more just a, defend every turn and like that's it?
Oh no, I'm definitely tracking cards, but there might not be the ones that you think about, because I'm gonna assume that they're gonna have some number of go again cards until the very end. The ones that I was really tracking are the Rift Binds, because generally this comes down to, as you saw in the finals match, it comes down to a big Rift Bind turn or 2. And if you can weather that, you're going to win. So if they banish their Rift Binds and play their Rift Binds early, they're doing it wrong, because then the matchup is suddenly very easy for me. So I want to see those Rift Binds gone. And the Seeds as well, because those are their non-attack actions to buff that Rift Bind.
Yeah, okay, that's some good insight. See, this is why I'm not the calling winner person. I mean, they're counting the Shadow Puppetries and Tyler's going, man, this guy, what's he up to? I guess... we've sort of danced around a little bit about the top 8, but I wouldn't mind just zeroing in and chatting a little bit about those top 8 games, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And starting with the first one against Dash. So that was actually against a player, Alberto Miracle, I believe. And a little bit of trivia for you. Alberto has been sort of connected to the New Zealand community a little bit through a couple of Fab group chats here and there. So I think there are probably a couple of people cheering against you, I have to say, during that one. Although, Alberto, I love Alberto, it's great, but I have to say I did think your Prism deck might have a slightly better shot against Chane at the end of the day. I might be wrong, so I was pretty neutral on that one. But how was your Dash matchup generally? Because I thought you played that one quite well. It just seemed to me that you were in control pretty much throughout the entire game, that you had a number of Spectral Shields and other auras that just couldn't be dealt with. One small thing I noticed is that I felt Alberto might have used a few too many of those Phantasm poppers a little bit early, things like Red Throttle, things like Command and Conquer. Was that the feeling you got, or did I sort of read that completely wrong?
The matchup was actually probably a lot closer than you think it was, and I feel he made a couple of crucial mistakes. And this happened in our first feature match of the day as well. I think he let the nerves get the best of him because he kept going to damage and missing his go again on the pistol. And so then he would leave aura on the battlefield, which is exactly, if it's stuck on there, that's exactly what I want. If I can stack auras, I'm winning. And so when that would happen, I got way ahead. And he did it 3 times in the top 8 matchup. Granted, I think only 2 of them left me with an extra aura in play, which is pivotal. I mean, that's how I got so far ahead with the Ode to Wraths at the end.
Okay, I see. And that might have been something I missed, actually, watching it initially. Because sometimes it's hard to keep up without the game commentary as well. So do you feel that matchup, generally speaking, is, like you're saying, a bit closer than it may have appeared on the stream?
Yeah, I'm still in between whether I think it's somewhere around 50-50 or a little bit dash favored. This matchup is generally hard for me. What I want to do is get the life totals low, and then get a big Ode plus Prismatic Shield turn to make him start blocking. And so that's why you'll see me take pistol shot after pistol shot, because I don't think my life total matters. I just need to get his life total to a place where I can pressure him.
Right, because you spoke about the importance of aura stacking. Is that because it can be a little bit difficult to push damage with Heralds in that matchup, I suspect, just with the amount of things like Red Throttle, Maximum Velocity, Command and Conquer, that kind of thing. I wanted to ask, is Parable of Humility, do you find that very strong in that matchup for getting around that, because it also affects defending cards?
I actually don't think Parable is that strong in the matchup. Why I tend to run it is because it's another aura stack. So
okay.
You either end up leaving... Parable is one of those things where you, like, I don't need to attack that because it doesn't affect me that much. I'm going to be attacking with pistols. But then all of a sudden you've thrown a couple of attacks on the field. It's been -1 each time, and that damage stacks. Now you can't block with Command and Conquer to pop my Phantasm anymore if I decide to attack with Herald of Erudition or something. And it just kind of sneaks up on you. But I would say that it's probably still one of the weaker auras in the deck.
Okay, and one point in that matchup that I wanted to ask you about as well is I noticed it was relatively early in the game. I think you forced out a block at some point, but it was when Alberto had a Spark of Genius, and it looked like he was potentially trying to save some cards to use that to fetch up a second chamber. It ended up being the only remaining card in his hand, I believe, and he played it for a Teklo core to fetch up to generate some resources. Did you feel, was that a potentially pivotal moment in the game because it stripped his chance to get sort of that early second chamber down?
Yeah, I felt really good about that because I when he's not attacking me and doing anything, that's another chance for me to stack an aura. And I think I did that turn. I am failing to think what I followed up with, but even if I didn't, just having a free turn when you're the one applying pressure is amazing. So that is why I think I can win this matchup, and it's not completely dash favored, is if they take that turn off to play an item, you can then put a whole bunch of pressure on them with your full grip.
Yep. Okay, well, I feel that largely covers off the dash matchup. It's a deck that's seen a bit of a resurgence, I feel, in the metagame, with its kind of strategy of being able to almost sideboard into a racing strategy against Chane. So I was interested to see your thoughts on that. But if we perhaps move on to the semi-final matchup now. Now, this one was really exciting for me to watch. It's funny, I think it was one of those games where I tuned in, and it seemed to be, I think it was like the Chamberlain had 6 Soul Shackles and you're on 36 life, and they kind of transitioned into this game. And I think, I said to a few friends, wait, are these life totals correct? Is there some sort of display area here? Because something's not quite right.
Believe it or not, that was not the highest life total I was at a late Soul Shackle during the tournament. I think at one point I was at Soul Shackle 6 with 46 life against one of my Chane opponents. So this has not been common for me to be at a very high life total that late in the game.
Damn, that's insane.
Yeah, so this was a game where I feel it looked like you were sort of quite heavily in control of the game. You're on very high life. The Chane player was up to a large number of Soul Shackles, but we could start to see the Chane player banishing, building up these cards in their blood debt, or in their banish zone that had blood debt they could play through. And critically, they had a time snap potion in play. Now, this led to one of my favorite plays of the tournament, which I thought was very, very cool. I was talking about it with Carol as it was happening. We saw you had the Arclight Sentinel down, and then the Chane player, cracks the time snap, starts playing out some Seeds of Agony, I believe, on that turn. And then I think it was Carol saying, like, imagine the second Arclight here. Like, that would be the highlight. And we're, like, watching it because we're thinking, this could start to be quite a difficult turn to defend out because, time snap, it's going to nullify that first Arclight. And then, you're going through the motions and then you drop the second Arclight. And I was just like, now we're playing Flesh and Blood. Here we go.
That it was absolutely crazy, and I'm sure you could have seen how slowly it was going, and that's due to a number of judge calls that were happening. So first I went, and these were all just rules questions. So first I go ask the judge if I can play an Arclight in response to the Spectra triggering. And then I come back to the table thinking, okay, I'm going to wait for him to attack. Even after he pops his time snap, I'm going to wait for him to attack the Arclight to play the second one. Then he goes and asks the judge something, and then comes back, and he starts playing Seeds, at which point I'm thinking, oh, the judge gave him a bad ruling on whether Seeds trigger.
Yeah, I was actually not so much wondering about the judge, I was just wondering if the players were aware of that interaction. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so everybody, he got a good ruling. I think he just really wanted to get out the Ursur token and thought that the Ursur token was going to win him the game. Which is actually something I haven't brought up yet, is a lot of the times in my testing, the Ursur token will come down, but it's not the most important thing because it's just another attack. You still need to give it go again, and I can block it. I can full block it late. So, well, I think he made a pivotal mistake thinking that was going to win him the game. And then, unfortunately, and this came up later after the Ursur was down, I got a judge call that was ambiguous, which was that Herald of Judgment going into the Ursur token. I think both me and my opponent understood the judge call to say that the judgment, the banish effect was in effect, but all he said was that the on-hit trigger would happen, and then we just both understood that to mean that the banish effect would be there, so we both had a misunderstanding.
Yeah,
which was against him, obviously.
Yeah, that was... because the Seeds of Agony triggering into the Spectra, how they sort of fizzle a little bit. Yeah, I was a little bit confused about that. It did seem that, the player was looking to really make sure that Ursa token came down. I felt that might have been a slight misplay potentially because they may have needed those seeds to get, to have a shot at winning the game. Because like you say, once you run through all the non-attack actions, it's very difficult to build up a big enough turn to win. But yeah, the judge one was a bit interesting. We were keeping an eye on that. I had our rules and policy manager on speed dial just to make sure everything was correct there. It's all good feedback to have for future tournaments. Because it was our understanding that sort of the question was asked: does the on-hit effect trigger, as in will it go to the soul?
And that's it. That's exactly what I asked.
Yeah, because it's just to give you some context and background there. It's those questions can be a little bit difficult sometimes because the judge, if they ask, does will the Herald effect trigger that it goes into Soul? That answer is yes, and it starts to veer into sort of strategic advice if they say that triggers, but this other part doesn't trigger. Whereas if the question was asked, does the on-hit does the on-hit effect if they can't play banish cards, then they can answer that one. But obviously it's something, we'll look to review and make sure we get correct for future tournaments. But yeah, from my perspective, it looked like it didn't hugely impact the game one way or the other because it looked like...
I don't believe it did. I ended the game at about 29 life and all the seeds were gone, so the rift binds weren't going to be that big at that point. As I said, I think the pivotal moment was when he decided to jam all those seeds into the Arclight and to get the Ursur token out. And so, yeah, I guess this is a bit of advice for Chane that Ursur token, while powerful, is not going to automatically win you the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's that thing you were mentioning as well. Not having those cards in Soul, I feel like really shuts down some of the effectiveness of that. They're just not... It is just a vanilla attack for 6 that requires an action point, rather than just this, like, back-breaking attack that is just coming in for way too much damage every turn with Go again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that was the highlight of the game for me was definitely the double Arclight, but also the back-to-back snag into another Arclight. That was just like a cherry on top, I have to say.
The embarrassment of riches for me, showcasing really if you draw everything, that this matchup can be completely out of control.
Yeah,
definitely.
It just seemed like that was just that was really cool to see. Like, because we were thinking like, if he's setting up the double Arclight here and he's got through the time snap potion and he eats all up the seeds, that's going to be backbreaking. That's exactly what happened in the end. So I thought that was great. One of my favorite plays of the tournament. And I suppose moving on to the final, a bit of a play-by-play, but the final, that was the game where I felt that was the one you were potentially under the most pressure out of any of the top 8 games, just from my perspective. So feel free to jump in and correct me here. But that seemed to be one where the Chane player managed to stack up, I feel like 1 or 2 from memory, very big Riftbind turns that you didn't have the snags for, and dropped down a bit of life. Was that sort of the sense that you were getting from that game?
Absolutely. When I saw the banish, so I had an Arclight turn where he forced it out because of a Command and Conquer.
Yeah, I did see that one, and sorry, just on the side note, I thought that was a great sort of getaway, and the fact you took 6 damage, and I felt you weren't happy about taking 6 damage there, but you did at least get the Sentinel down, which was something.
Yeah, and I got the Sentinel down versus an opponent who wasn't playing Time Snap Potion, so or at least I don't think he was when I looked at his deck list. And so at least it wasn't down on the field, and I knew that it was going to get some value, and so I was happy to take the 6 in that sense. But the fact that it was then gone, and I pitched another Arclight Sentinel to play it, wasn't happy about.
Yeah, I did notice that.
Yeah, and then so when I got to those later turns and I couldn't draw a snag, so this is basically the opposite of the semifinals where I don't have a snag or an Arclight to contend. You still saw that I was able to block out enough damage. Now, during that, you're absolutely right. I'm on Heightened Sense. You can see each of my blocks was methodically planned out because I wanted to block for the full amount on each card. You don't want to be blocking a 2 attack for 3 unless you know it's going to be the end of the chain. You're trying to full block as much as possible, and luckily I was able to stave off, and I think I was around 11 life after the 2 Riftbind turns.
Yeah, because I remember seeing that, and it looked like one of those things where, you're remarkably composed throughout the top 8, I feel like, kind of more so than me. Like, my only way to do it, because I kind of express myself in my face a bit much, my only way to do it is my friends call it robot mode, where I just go clenched draw. I look like I'm having a terrible time the entire tournament. But I noticed... Sorry.
I love card games, so it's if you just focus on the actual card game in front of you and not about the trophy that's sitting next to you or the big gold tunic at the end, it's one of the ways of blocking out. Just focus on what's in front of you.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I saw this as one of those things where I think when the first or second big Riftbind turn came down, you were... So body language looked not defeated, but just sort of a little stressed, like, this is a lot of damage coming, I don't have the snag, and that Arclight is a while away. But I remember thinking, I feel the big shift for me was in that second big Riftbind turn where you managed to stay alive and above 10 life. I think I sort of saw the game state, and I feel like, Tyler's looking at this too, thinking, it's 2 turns to go till the championship. If I survive the second big Riftbind turn, there's maybe 1 more turn to go. I've got through like some of the major turns. A lot of the Seeds of Agony are gone. I'm so close. And I felt towards the end of that second last turn and then on the final turn, it sort of you looked over at his banish zone, you kind of looked at your cards and you kind of sat up a little bit, and I was like, I think he's got this. He knows he's got this at this point.
I did. Once I was at that point at 11 life and he started his next turn and it was kind of suboptimal, I knew I had won at that point. And it was just a matter of keeping my, I knew I was going to take some damage, and so it was a matter of getting rid of the Ursur token was the big one, and it was harder than it looked because my deck was stacked with auras on the bottom at that point. And so you'll see me block out stuff where I normally would want to just like block for 3 and take some damage and then kill it, but I couldn't draw a Herald for 6 to do it.
Yep. Yeah, because
so that was a bit concerning for me. So I knew I had won. It was just a matter of could I actually get rid of this Ursur token to make it final, and I think it took me about 3 turns to do it.
Yeah, and I actually appreciated the fact that, like, even when you're in a winning position, just being very methodical and making sure you get everything correct. Because, like, particularly that late in the tournament, like, even sometimes when it looks like the game's absolutely over, you know, you never know, like, a big mistake you can make, and suddenly you're drawing 3 0-block cards because you've miscounted the pitch and everything's, like, going downhill. So I like that, you know, you kind of decked out all the cards and then you're attacking for 1 with the auras and just saying, look, I'm not throwing this away. I've played, 16 rounds or something at this point. Like, we're locking it in.
Yeah, I could have very easily been on the other end if I had just been careless there at the end and thrown it away, you know?
Yep. And then that's where it's funny, the very last bit at the end there when the Chane, I could sort of tell, that second big Riftbind turn after that finished, and the Chane probably realized I didn't get quite enough damage through, and now I don't have this many cards left. It reminded me of my own calling final a long time ago when I played aggro versus Control Ninja, and that sort of, it sucks as the aggro deck when you get to that point, you kind of realize, oh no, like,
You're out of gas.
I'm out of gas, like, there's, the nearest station's a long way away, and they're just grinding me out, so... Yeah,
a place I like all Chane players to be.
Yes.
To be honest, like, I have to say that for that final, there's just something poetic about it, What a way to finish the whole Monarch Classic Constructed season with a good old light versus shadow showdown. That was great.
I think it was the Herald of Judgment that killed the Ursur in the end, wasn't it? No,
it was the Herald of Protection this time, and this time I got my Spectral Shield, and I knew that I deserved that.
Yeah.
Okay. That slightly ruined my narrative. But you're like, we'll avoid the controversy and get the Herald of Protection this time, Yeah. Well, I think, that's kind of walked us through the top 8. I just wanted to go through and get it sort of, straight from you, directly, so to speak, rather than trying to get my own interpretations, because, I'd be rattling off all these wrong things like count their go-agains when that's totally wrong. So I appreciate that. But I suppose I just wanted to maybe, round things off a little bit by talking about the metagame and the upcoming metagame, if that's all right. Do you have any particular thoughts on the Monarch constructed metagame as it sort of played out across the road to Nationals and calling season?
Yeah, so I think that people tried to contend against Chane in a number of different ways. They, you had Katsu Control that looked like it was primed at the beginning, and then Chane just dominates that matchup. So that fell by the wayside. Everyone's saying Control Katsu's bad, and they're generally right. And then you see all these contenders try to take on these Chane decks, and Chane just dominating at that point. The matchups that I considered even or fair against Chane are like Dorinthia. Dawnblade is pretty good into it. The other one that I would want to play is maybe the Bolton Sabres deck had a lot of success. But in the end, you still saw this Chane domination until the calling, and I think I've kind of provided a blueprint of a deck that can beat Chane consistently, not just 50-50 or maybe like 55-45. I think I have a deck here that, unless the Chane deck changes, this would dominate. Now, of course, we're going into Tales, so that's not going to matter as much, but it would have been interesting to see how it would play out after that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, because I felt something like, I'm a little bit biased, but I felt Aggro Katsu was a deck that could sometimes race Chane a little bit as well. But the problem is it could fall prey a little bit to some other more difficult matchups, things like Katsu Control, things like Dash Control, with people playing that were difficult for Katsu, so it's tough to walk into like maybe a slightly favored Chane matchup with a number of difficult matchups, particularly over a very large tournament. The interesting thing you were saying, like we always say, on the podcast, that being aware of your local metagame is really, really important, more so than like what just people are saying on the internet and things like that. And I think you've really shown that because you kind of were aware of what the various chain decks were playing in the metagame, and you built this Prism deck in a way that could just really contend with them very strongly, which we saw through you just dominating Chane throughout the weekend. Because I feel, to give you some context, in kind of the local New Zealand metagame, some Chane players have felt like they've figured out a bit more how to deal with some of the fatigue strategies. I can't really speak to that because I haven't played a whole lot of those, like either on Chane or on the fatigue side. But yeah, I would be interested to see how they do, because from where I was sitting, you were just, like you said, you had the blueprint. It was very, very cool to watch.
Yeah, as I said, the only thing that I'm going to miss is that now that we're going to Tales of Aria, I won't get to see where this deck goes from here. I'll have to come up with a new one, but that's the new challenge, and I'm excited to take it.
Yeah, and speaking of Tales, what is the thing that you're most excited about the set coming out and joining the metagame?
Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting cards in here that I'm very excited for. And as I said, I'm more of a control player. I think there's some very good, specifically like lightning aggro cards in here. But the cards that I'm most interested in are these auras that make you discard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I might be trying out some discard strategies in the near future here.
Okay, so are these things like auras and on text, things like Winter's Bite, for example, or auras specifically?
The I forget what the card is called. I could look it up here, but it's something that comes down and then you can crack it to make your opponent do something.
Oh, like the Amulet of Ice and things like that.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, are you potentially looking at? I feel Oldham is the one a few players have kind of identified as the control, and is that you kind of got your eye on that a little bit?
I do have a discard Elemental Guardian in my future, I believe, and not to let too many things out of the bag here, but saving up discards and then having a big turn where you make your opponent discard all the cards is sounds like a powerful plan to me.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. Do you have any predictions, or is it too early? Do you have any predictions on what you think might be one of the most successful Tales decks, or whether things like Chane and Prism will still be around at the top of the meta?
So I think Chane's days are not numbered. I think it'll still be around, but these strategies all seem very good into it. Now, when you're talking about like, aggro decks that have just go again and not action points, and you're also talking about discard cards when you're playing Guardian, those aren't good into Prism because Prism can play at instant speed. And they don't really care about the discard when you're playing auras, and then when you're playing against aggro, when it's go again, you can arc light your way into more auras and things like that. So I'm still thinking that Prism's going to be up there. Chane's still going to be a deck, but I still think this is going to be maybe more of a, and you can play a lot of different strategies instead of saying there's this boogeyman in the format, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's really cool when there's sort of quite a diverse metagame and you don't necessarily have to build more towards certain decks. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out. I'm guessing you're going to be attending the US National Championships later this year?
Oh, I definitely will be. I'm looking forward to it. In fact, I've actually decided earlier today that I'm going to be going to Dallas Calling as well to play some Limited.
Oh, awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, I can say Tales of Aria Limited is one of my favorite all-time Limited formats, so I think you're in for a lot of fun there. It's very, very cool. And I suppose one of my final questions, maybe we'll go like a little bit controversial, a little bit more spice, just to round things off. Now, to preface this, I like to say that Carol and I have always been like major cheerleaders of the international community, by which we mean players outside of New Zealand. We are always sort of advocating that the game is growing, people are getting better and better overseas and everything. Now, I still see a couple of, dare I say, haters, people who disagree out there saying that New Zealand's still well ahead of everywhere else. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you feel the game is advancing in the United States and in your metagame in particular. Do you think, do you feel you guys are sort of on the level or catching up pretty quickly to New Zealand at this point, or do you think there's still a little bit of a gap, but it's closing quickly?
Yeah, this might be a bit controversial to go against myself here, but after playing this weekend against a lot of players from a lot of different locations in the United States, I would say that a lot of the New Zealand players are still a little bit ahead of us, and we're trying to catch up. But I think that we definitely have the tools to do it, and it doesn't take that long to catch up. And hopefully I'm just the first of many, but I think I'm up for the challenge when it comes to closing the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. Because awesome. When I was watching your play, I absolutely thought you would not be out of place playing in the top 8 of the New Zealand National Championships or anything like that. I thought you were playing absolutely incredibly, the whole way through. And I think the same goes for a number of players that I managed to catch on stream throughout the weekend. And I think that's a fair point that you make, that maybe there still is sort of a smallish gap, that some of that can be put down to the fact that, New Zealand has had the game for probably a lot more high-level organised play for probably well over a year before there are more opportunities elsewhere in the world, some of that due to COVID and other reasons. But I absolutely believe that the rest of the world is, if they're not there, that they're catching up very quickly. And I really cannot wait until we get some more high-level international organised play with players from all around the world to really sort of throw down the gauntlet and show who's best.
Yeah, give me and my boys, maybe another 2 or 3 big events, and then we'll give you a run for your money. How about that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I love it. So there we have it straight from Tyler. He's calling you out, Matt Rogers.
Right here on stream right now.
Oh.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, man. I love it. Well, I think that pretty much rounds out most of the things. We're a little bit rambly. We go from topic to topic, pretty free-flowing here. But was there anything else you wanted to finish off with, Carol? Any sort of questions, comments?
Well, I just wanted to say, hey, if you can take out a calling after 2 months of playing, I feel like that gap's going to close quickly. I just wanted to end off by saying, again, massive congratulations on your win. I feel like you've definitely put your name out there in the flesh and blood top player kind of
conversation
spot. Yeah, exactly. So I can't wait to see you topping more events in the future.
Yeah,
thank you so much. I mean, that's super high praise. So thank you.
Yeah, but I absolutely agree with Carol. That is, like we were saying, I feel your name is firmly etched into the history books as sort of the winner of the first. I mean, there were some US callings back a few years ago, but this was clearly the first major professional level American or US event, or North American, and your name is there forever. So a massive congratulations from me as well, and thank you so much for showcasing some really high level play from the American scene. And I also just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time to join us today and give us some insights into your deck and into the tournament. We really, really appreciate that.
Oh, no, the pleasure is all mine. So thank you, Kieran and Carol, for having me on.
No worries.
Yeah, no worries.
All the best. Best of luck for your future callings for Dallas. And, who knows, if you win that one, maybe we'll see you at Cincinnati as well. And, and all roads eventually lead to Orlando for the US Nationals. And I think that just about rounds it up. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you again, Tyler, for joining us. And yeah, we'll catch you all next time.
Yeah, see you, Tyler.
All right, bye.
Session Blood.